Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Parama Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarva Gurubhyo Namaha. So today we're going to start discussion of a book called Indian Philosophical Systems, which is a translation of Paramartha Bhanga by Vedanta Deshika, and it's translated by SMS Chari. And so just as an introduction to the book, of course, it'll be discussed as we go along. This Paramartha Bhanga, Vedanta Deshika, what he does is he goes through all of the different schools of thought and religions that are prevalent at his time. And he, one by one, he lists them and he goes through the good aspects and the bad aspects according to the vision of a Vishishtadvaitin, a person who's following the system of Vedanta set down propounded by Sriman Ramanujacharya, and we just go through it like that and see the arguments for and against different doctrines and practices of different schools. So I think it starts out with a general discussion of the three tattvas. In Vedanta, there are basically three tattvas. There's a chit, achit, and ishvara. So chit means that everything usually starts in philosophy with chit, which starts with the discussion of the conscious soul. And even in the West, we have people like Descartes who say, I think, therefore I am. So everybody has this understanding that we exist because we are conscious beings, and therefore, because we're conscious, we understand that we exist, and therefore that is the beginning of philosophical inquiry. So let's have a look at and see how this text deals with it. So chit, of course, is the individual consciousness, the individual soul or Atman. It can be called Jivatman. And achit is, of course, insentient matter. It means unconscious. And then Ishvara is the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord is also conscious, but very great, whereas the individual soul is very small. So we'll go into the more details as we get into the book. So just remember, anytime anybody wants to discuss any particular part, you can just unmute, or you can type in the chat also, and I'll be watching the chat and see if anybody has any questions or comments. And feel free to add your understanding. More or less, we're just going through and discussing this. So this is the title of the book, Indian Philosophical Systems, a critical review based on Vedanta Deshika's Paramartha Bhanga. Now, the other thing that he's done is, because several schools of thought and several different religions have sprung up after Vedanta Deshika, even different forms of Vedanta. So he's also included his commentary on those schools as well. So SMS Chari is a Vadagalai Sri Vaishnava. There are two schools. There's the southern school and the northern school. The southern school is the Tengalaya Acharyas, and the northern school, the Vadagalaya Acharyas. So there are two schools of thought in Vedanta, in Vishishtadvaita. Everybody's following Vishishtadvaita, all the Sri Vaishnavas, but there are some slight differences between the Vadagalais and Tengalais. But mostly in terms of Vedantic doctrine, there's no dispute. So SMS Chari was a Vadagalai Acharya, but he's a Vadagalai teacher, but very nice person. I met him in Los Angeles many years ago. I think he passed away 2007 or something like that. Anyway, but whether yeah, go ahead.
Just a very quick, if you like, a threshold question. Were these differences, if you like, the subsects within Sri Vaishnavism, had they crystallized at the stage of Vedanta Deshika's own career, or were these later developments? I mean, I know that Vedanta Deshika does address, if you like, some of the theological disputes, but I don't know whether it's necessarily accurate to describe them as disputes. Then I'm just thinking to myself, how, if you like, were there distinct traditions back then, or was it more just one large sampradaya, and there were simmering tensions in terms of theology?
Right. So more or less at the time of Vedanta Deshika, historically, which was, Ramanuja was 1017 to 1137 CE, and then we have Vedanta Deshika coming along, I believe 1269. Anyway, so about 100 years later, and so at that time we also had. So if we call Vedanta Deshika a proto-Wadagalai, and we call Pila Lokacharya proto-Tengalai, so there were some differing opinions at that time on certain aspects of Ramanuja's teachings, and just details, and basically, and so Vedanta Deshika wrote. There's a lot of the differences come in the books called Rahasya Granthas, and the Rahasya Granthas we're dealing with in other classes. We're going through a book called Mumukshapadi. There's also, which is by Pila Lokacharya, with a commentary by Manavala Mahamuni, who continued the flow towards the Tengalai split, and Vedanta Deshika, who wrote also these esoteric doctrine books. And his magnum opus was Rahasya Trayasaram, but he also wrote some other Rahasya Granthas, Chilarai Rahasyandal, and we have all of those. And so basically, it's more about the interpretation of exactly what the system of property is, and the meanings of the different mantras which are given at Samashrayanam and Panchasamskara. And so it's those sort of things which become, and then some other things, some things which become more technical about grace and about the position of Mahalakshmi and those sort of things. There are 18 major differences or we could say points of difference, but there are many smaller differences. They're covered by some people in different books, but we're not really concerned in this book with the difference between Wadagalais and Tengalais, because every one of us, we're all following Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, and there really isn't, in general, a whole lot of difference between the Wadagalai and Tengalais understanding of Vishishtadvaita. So Vishishtadvaita is more about the different types of Vedanta are about the relationship between Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. So as I said, Chit is the individual soul, Achit is insentient matter, and God, or Ishvara is God, is the supreme. So the relationship between those is when you hear of different Vedantic schools, they've all got in one line or in one word, basically, they tell you their opinion. So Advaita tells you what they believe about the relationship between those three. The persons who are smartas or followers of Adi Shankara, they believe that they are all one. Whereas you have Dvaita, which is the complete opposite. They say, no, they're not all one, they're two. So Dvaita meaning two, Advaita meaning one. So, or Advaita literally means not two, Advaita. So then there are all different types of things that are in between those two understandings. How something can be one and at the same time be a little bit different. And so there's Vishishta Dvaita, Dvaita Dvaita, Shuddha Dvaita, Achintya Beda. Beda also means difference, Abeda means non-difference. So there are all these different forms of Vedanta. In this book, we're going to be discussing not just the schools of Vedanta, but also some other schools like Charvaka. You can see here in the table of contents, the first part gives the fundamental doctrines of Vishishta Dvaita. Now, I considered, when starting something like this, starting with something more basic, but sometimes the basic texts become a little bit boring to go through. So maybe we can jump into this and see if it becomes too heavy or too difficult to understand, then maybe we can do a more basic text like Yatindra Maradipika. There's a person called Srinivasa who wrote a book called Yata Indra. Yatindra means the emperor or the king of all sannyasis. Yati means sannyasi. Indra means the head or the king, leader, let's say, the leader of all sannyasis. Yatindra Mata means his philosophy. And we have these different mats that people belong to, and they spread mata, they spread the doctrine, a certain doctrine. So it means doctrine, mata. Yatindra Mata Deepika. Deepika means a light, like a deepa, like a diya, deepa. The light on the philosophy or the doctrinal school of the king of all, or the leader of all sannyasis, Ramanuja, meaning Ramanuja. So that's a very basic book. It starts out by explaining about the different pramanas. Pramanas are the first part of epistemology, or the understanding of how we know what we know, right? How we understand what is true knowledge is our system of epistemology, in which case we first of all talk about how we gain knowledge. So there are different pramanas. So we gain knowledge by sense perception. We gain knowledge by inference or logical argument, right? And we also gain knowledge from authoritative statements that we get from the Shastras, from the scriptures, or from some persons who are give worthy authoritative statements. So knowledgeable people, authentic people. So anyway, that Yatindra Maradipika starts very, very basically with the idea of epistemology. Here, we're probably not going to do that here, although the epistemological approach of each school will probably be discussed. Still, we can understand that probably we've understood already that we know that these three types of ways of understanding knowledge are accepted. What we call pratyaksha, anumana, and shabda, which means pratyaksha means sense perception, anumana means logical inference, and shabda means authoritative statement, which naturally we accept in terms of the answer to questions about things which are beyond sense perception, material empirical sense perception. We have to accept some scriptural statement. So, for instance, we have no way of perceiving Vaikuntha or the spiritual world, so we can only just take it on the word of the scriptures, what it is, and the description of it. So, and then we can go into details like, according to Vedanta, all the schools of Vedanta and even some other schools, except the Vedas, and the Vedas are considered to be the highest scriptural authority. And there are some schools that don't say that, and there are some schools, of course, like Buddhism and Buddhism, for instance, who doesn't. They neglect the Vedas. They're not interested in the Vedas. They don't accept that as scriptural authority. But we'll get into all of that. So why don't we just look at the table of contents here? So part one, as I said, chit, achit, and para. Here he's saying paratattva. You can see in the table of contents, the jiva or the jivatman is chit tattva. Tattva means can mean truth, but it also means a principle. So that what is the principle of consciousness, of individual consciousness? That is the doctrine of jiva, the principle of individual consciousness. The second part is the doctrine of cosmic matter, or we can just say matter, because obviously all matter exists in the cosmos, right? Achit tattva, achit, non-sentient, the non-sentient principle in the universe. So, and then the doctrine of Brahman. The word Brahman just simply means the greatest. That person is the greatest. Also, the tendency is to accept Brahman as the source of the other two principles, the original principle, and that is also called Paratattva, the supreme principle. Para means the highest. Okay, so These are the first parts, the fundamental doctrines according to Vishishtadvaitins. And how can we translate Vishishtadvaita? What I want to do is whenever we come to a Sanskrit word here, I want to try to understand, because a lot of jargon will be thrown around in this book. And so it becomes quite confusing if you don't have a good idea of what the words mean. Then you're not going to get an understanding of the underlying doctrines. So Vishishta Advaita. Advaita, as I said, means non-dualism, right? Dvaita that comes from the word dva, meaning two. So Adva means not two or one. If it's not two, it must be one. There's no idea that it could be three or four or five. So Advaita means non-dual, monistic understanding, right? So in Vedanta there is a school called Advaita, and which was propounded by Adi Shankaracharya. I think everybody's familiar with that, or at least a little bit. And what does Vedanta mean? The word Veda means knowledge, and the Vedas are a group of books that are considered to be apaurushaya. They are unauthored. They're considered to be unauthored because there are certain problems with books that are authored, because the author may make a mistake. There are so many problems with that, but they are considered to be revelations. And the rishis, the ancient rishis, meditated, and in their meditation they understood these eternal books, the Vedas. And so they're considered to be the highest scripture because they're not considered to be written down by any mundane author. So Advaita is understanding the Advaita school, all the different Vedanta schools, they're understanding Vedanta, the end of the Vedas. So there are different sections of the Vedas. The first section of the Vedas is the Samhitas. There are all hymns in the Vedas, which were used in Vedic sacrifice mostly. Then there are the Brahmanas. There are books called Brahmanas, which were used by the priests. The priests are also called Brahmanas. They use those books as manuals, as ritualistic manuals to use the hymns of the Samhitas in the sacrifices. Then we have Aranyakas, some books for the people who are not doing the sacrifices, but who have gone to the forest to understand, to meditate and to understand about life and about the world and about the Supreme. So they've gone to the forest and they've renounced and they're just meditating. So for the Aranyakas, and then the Upanishads, and the word Upanishad means Upanishad. So Shad Siddhati means to sit. Upani means to sit close. So unfortunately, we have Zoom now, so we're not sitting close. But normally what people do is when they want to discuss things or when they want to learn something from somebody, here we're just having a discussion. I don't consider myself to be a teacher, but we're going to discuss different things. And by being close as we can be with Zoom, right, we are thus discussing different things, different doctrines. So the Upanishads, literally there are hundreds of Upanishads, but mainly they come down to a list of about 108, of which there are about 10 or 12 or 13, which are considered most seminal and most important, most primary. And these Upanishads, they explain the philosophy of the Vedas, and they're the philosophical part, whereas the other parts are like the Samhitas and the Brahmanas are more the ritualistic part, the Karma Kanda. And then we have what's called the Jnana Kanda or the Upasana Kanda. The Karma Kanda would be the section on work, on different works, meaning the different sacrifices that people do, and the Jnana Kanda about knowledge, and the Upasana Kanda about worship of God. So I've thrown around a lot of Sanskrit jargon here, a lot of words. Getting back to Vishishtadvaita, Vishishta means a specifics. We could also call Vishishtadvaita. So Advaita can be called non-dualism, and all forms of Vedanta have some form of non-dualism. But the idea is to understand that the jiva, matter, and God have some relationship. They have some relationship. So that because they have some relationship, they have some non-dualism. They have some relationship. But what kind of non-dualism is that? Okay, so Shakra says that's total, complete, absolute non-dualism. They're absolutely one. Madhva says they're absolutely not one. And everybody else, all the other schools are a little bit in between. And Vishishtadvaita is basically saying specific things that the soul and matter are one with God in specific ways, So we could call it a specified non-dualism, Vishishtadvaita, or we could call it also like a holistic non-dualism. Okay. Anyway, so this is the first 3 chapters, and then part 2, he goes into a critical review of the other schools. So Charvaka is Indian atheism, basically. Hedonism, we could say. Hedonism means, just people who are interested in sense gratification or just material pleasure. Buddhism, Jainism. Then we have some of the other Saddarshanists. The Saddarshanists, the darshan is a school of thought. Sad it means in Sanskrit 6. There are 6 schools of thought, main schools of thought in India, which follow the Vedas. So when we divide up schools of thought, we divide them into Vedic schools and non-Vedic schools. So schools that accept the authority of the Vedas and schools that don't accept them. So the schools that accept them are called Astika. Astika means some people, and then the ones that don't are called Nastika. Now the word Nastika sometimes in India means atheist. But in actual fact, Astika and Nastika means simply the Astikas follow the Vedas, the Nastikas do not follow the Vedas. So here we have the Charvaka and the Buddha, Charvaka and Buddhism. They don't follow the Vedas, they don't accept the Vedas. The Jains, they accept a few things in the Vedas. They're also in the Vedics, but they're usually considered to be Nastika. So if we look at the Astika schools, there are these Saddarshanas. There's these 6 different main schools. They are Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Yoga, Sankhya, and Purva and Uttar Mimamsa. So Mimamsa means deliberation. So there's a first type of deliberation and a second type of deliberation. The first type of deliberation is, like I said, about karma kanda, about different sacrifices and works to attain heaven and different things like that. That is called Purva Mimamsa, otherwise known as karma kanda, right? Uttar Mimamsa also has a different name, and that is Vedanta. So those are two schools that have to do with Mimamsa, right? Then we have yoga. So we have a yoga school. We have a Nyaya school, which is logic. Yoga means linking with the supreme. Nyaya means logic. There are different schools of logic. Then there's yoga, Sankhya. Sankhya means counting. So it's sort of almost like science. It's enumeration. It's empirical study. Sankhya Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, and these other schools. We'll see as we go along the little differences, but these are the Saddarshanas. Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Yoga, Sankhya, Purva, and Uttar Mimamsa are the 6 schools that basically follow the Vedas. Okay, so here we have Charvaka, Indian atheism, Buddhism. Now, Buddhism, the section on Buddhism, I'm just giving you an overview. Okay, the section on Buddhism is going to not have all the different schools of Buddhism that we know today, but he's going to talk about the schools of Buddhism that existed at the time of Vedanta Deshika. This could be elaborated now to talk about the schools of Buddhism that we have today, because today we have basically 3 forms of Buddhism. We have the Theravada, which is an older form, which can also be called pejoratively Mahayana, right? Theravada, Mahayana. The word Vada also means a person who speaks a particular doctrine like that. So we have, for instance, you might have heard the word Mayavada. It means people who speak about Maya, which is not, or illusion. Those who talk about illusion, Mayavada. So all of these all of these philosophies can be called Vadas also. So we have Theravada in Buddhism. We have Mahayana and is also considered Mahayana, and then we have Hinayana, and then we have Vajrayana. Vajrayana is basically the Tibetan form of Buddhism, and then you have other which is very much like Hinduism, and then you have the other forms of Buddhism when they moved out of India. Yeah, Buddhism started in India, and originally there was probably one school originally, but it became in India. Within India, it became four schools: the Sautrantika, the Madhyamika, like this. So those schools will be discussed here. Those four original schools of Buddhism. So we're not expecting to talk about Zen or pure Soto Pure Land or whatever, all these different forms of Buddhism. We're not expecting to talk about that. We're just expecting to talk about the original four Indian schools of Buddhism. So then in the Nyaya school about logic, Nirishvara Mimamsa. So Mimamsa, but Nirishvara means that the Karma Kanda. There are some people who believe in Nirishvara. Nirishvara means without God, a school of thought without God. Nirishvara Mimamsa. Nir, Ishvara meaning God, and Nir meaning without. So then Sankhya, as I said, in empirical understanding. Yoga. Sometimes Vishishtadvaita, in the philosophy of Vishishtadvaita, we accept some things, like we accept basically the idea of creation and how creation occurred according to the Sankhya school. Pasupata is a Shaiva school, so there are people who believe in the supremacy of Shiva, and they believe certain types of philosophies, just like there are Vaishnava schools, there are also Shaiva schools. More or less, this is getting away from philosophy and getting more into the area of theology. Okay, so then the difference being that there might be a Vishishtadvaita school. Of Ramanuja has a Vishishtadvaita school. His philosophy is holistic non-dualism. There might be a Shaiva school, which also has holistic non-dualism as their philosophy, but their doctrines and their theology has to do with Shiva being the supreme. There was a person called Srikanta who came after Ramanuja and wrote a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. But he, instead of understanding that Narayana was supreme, he said, no, Shiva is supreme, and he wrote his commentary like that to say that Shiva is supreme. So there are many schools of Shaivism also. There are Shaiva Agamas, and they follow those in the temples and when they worship Shiva. So that's also be discussed. The Pancharatra school is here. Now, somebody might say, well, Pancharatra is an Agama. It's a type of, it's a way that Vaishnavas perform worship and perform their different practices, right? And there are two different agamas. Agama means a method of worship or a method of acting, a method of living. Agama. We can also use the word tantra for agama, non-different. So there are different Vaishnava agamas. There are also Shaiva agamas and Shakta agamas for those people who worship Shiva and Shakti as supreme. But in the Vaishnava agamas, there's basically two divisions. There's the Pancharatra agama and the Vaikhanasa agama. The Vaikhanasa agama is an older, more Vedic, using more Vedic mantras agama. The other Pancharatra agama is more useful today because anybody can perform Pancharatra rituals and things like that. So here is going to be discussed the Pancharatra school. The Pancharatra school is actually a distinct school from Sri Vaishnavism. People will think, oh no, all Sri Vaishnavas are just Pancharatrans. We accept Pancharatra, and Pancharatra is a part of Sri Vaishnavism. So Sri Vaishnavism itself is the Vedanta of Vishishtadvaita, coupled with the philosophy or the theology of Pancharatra, and also add on to that the Nalaya Divya Prabandham, the great 4,000 Tamil verses of the 12 Alvars. If we add all those things together, we more or less get Sri Vaishnavism as it is today. So there are different things that come into play here. So Pancharatra is going to be discussed. We accept Pancharatra, and Vedanta Deshika is going to be he wrote another book, in fact, about that. Both Yamunacharya and Vedanta Deshika have written books. Pancharatra Raksha is the book that Vedanta Deshika wrote. Agama Pramanya was written by Yamunacharya, which supports the idea of Pancharatra because Adi Shankaracharya decried Pancharatra and he didn't like Pancharatra, so he wrote against it. So Yamunacharya wrote Agama Pramanya and Vedanta Deshika wrote Pancharatra Raksha to show that Pancharatra is accepted. It's an authority, it's an authoritative body of literature, and it deals with the worship of Lord Srimanarayana, and therefore we should accept it. Okay, so continuing on there, Sabda Brahma Vaivarta Vada, again Vada here, of Vyakarna. We'll see these different schools. And then two big schools here of Vedanta, Advaita and Dvaita. The Advaita, the Smarta school in India, and the Dvaita or Vedanta of Madhvacharya. So then continuing on, we're going to have the Beta schools. Beta means Dvaita means dual and non-dual. And these were originally started, all the Beta schools come from the original Beta schools are by Bhaskara and Yadava Prakasha. Now, Yadava Prakasha was the original Gurukul teacher of Ramanuja. But he left that Gurukul because he had some misgivings and some disagreements with the way the philosophy that Yadava Prakash was speaking. So Bhaskara and Yadava Prakash, they have slightly different schools of Beta, and we'll be discussing that. So then in the 18th chapter, we have other Beta schools, and this will deal with more modern versions. For instance, the school of Vallabhacharya, the school of Nimbarkacharya, the school of Chaitanya, right? These are all other forms of Beta, right? So we have the Shuddha Dvaita of Vallabha, the Dvaita of Nimbarka, and the Achintya Beta Tattva of Chaitanya, or of Baladev, actually, from the mid-18th century. So we have these other forms of Beta schools. This is where SMS Chari has extrapolated what Vedanta Deshika said, because those schools perhaps were not current at the time of Vedanta Deshika, or they didn't, they obviously the Vallabha and the Chaitanya schools grew up later. There's there might be a disagreement as to how old Nimbarka is, and the Nimbarka school is, but anyway, we can leave that. So then continuing on, there's some other schools of Shaiva Dvaita. There's some other schools, and Navya Vishishta Dvaita. Navya Vishishta Dvaita, I believe that's going to be talking about maybe Vaikunasa Agama. Okay, so then we're going to, when we finish a discussion about the schools, about the different schools, there'll be a discussion of upaya. Upaya means the means. What do we mean by means? Is the means should be a method of attaining a goal, right? So in Sri Vaishnava discussion, or actually in any discussion of any school, there are three topics that come up. They are tattva, hita, and purushartha. So tattva means, as I said, it means the principle. It means the principle. So understanding principles, understanding things from their basics, breaking everything down into the elements, into their elements, and understanding that. So tattva has to be understood first. We have to understand different principles. Then, after understanding different principles, right? Hita means how to Hita also means upaya, different means, the means. So what is the means to? The means is to Purushartha. Purushartha means the goals of human beings, the goals of human life. So Purusha means human, and Artha means, what is to be attained, or the goal. So Purusharthas in India, in Indian philosophy, normally there are four Purusharthas, four goals of human life, which are discussed. They are sense gratification, Artha, um, karma, I'm sorry, materialistic gain, economic development, making money, right? Making money, artha, economic development. Then karma, we've got the money, we've made the money. Now we're going to use the money, we're going to spend the money to enjoy sense pleasures. That is called karma. That is also a goal of human life. The third one is called dharma. We have the money and we have enjoyed everything. So now that we're okay, so let's also give some charity. Let's also look after other people. Let's follow all the rules of the society properly and be very honest and being very upstanding and being very forthright. That is dharma. Dharma means religiosity. And then the fourth one, or the highest one, the one which the philosophical schools are most interested in, is called moksha. And moksha means liberation, or getting out of this repeated samsara, or cycle of birth and death, and attaining. There are different concepts of moksha, but for Sri Vaishnavas, the concept of moksha or liberation is the eternal service of the Supreme Lord in his place in Sri Vaikuntha. So we'll go through that. And so upaya is the method, is the method for attaining moksha. And then the doctrine of purushartha, as I just said, there are different purusharthas, so we can understand that. In fact, sometimes we talk about three aspects of discussion: tattva, hita, and purushartha, right? The principles, the methods, and the goal. We also sometimes talk about artha panchika. So panchika means five. Artha means goals. Right, so there are five aspects to the goal, right? So there's tattva, understanding what the reality is, understanding the means, understanding the goal, right? And then understanding the impediments to the goal, right? The upaya virodhi. Virodhi means an impediment to the goal. So that's four: tattva, hita, purushartha. Anyway, artha panchikam is also a way of it eludes me right now exactly to explain it, but we'll get back to it. So anyway, so then there is a glossary in the book. So the terms that we come across, we'll be able to understand them more. If at any time we're going through this and you hear a term and we haven't explained it, we'll explain it when it's first used, and then we might use it after that and assume that people have understood it. But if you don't understand it, again, I'll try to repeat the understanding of each time a Sanskrit word is used. Okay, so one scholar wrote a Sanskrit forward for this. Let's have a look at the preface. The preface is written by the author, and so he says Vedanta Deshika, and Vedanta Deshika again lived in the 13th century. Vedanta Deshika, an illustrious successor to Ramanuja, wrote two important philosophical treatises entitled Tattva Mukta Kalapa and Adhikarana Saravali. Okay, so devoted primarily to establish Vishishtadvaita Vedanta as a sound system of philosophy. He also contributed another important philosophical work under the title Paramartha Bhanga, in which he presents a critical review of the main tenets of 16 schools of thought, covering the non-Vedic schools, right? The ones that don't accept the Vedas, right? Such as Charvaka, Buddhism, Jainism, and also Vedic schools such as Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Pasupata, Purvamamsa, Vyakarna, Bhaskara, Advaita, and Vishishtadvaita. The main purpose of this work is to show how Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, expounded by Sri Ramanuja on the unquestionable authority of the Upanishads and the Vedanta Sutra of Badarayana, is the soundest philosophy as compared to all the other Indian philosophical schools of thought. Okay, so we can understand the history of Indian philosophy. There's been different schools of thought, and they have battled it out in disputations, they've had different arguments, and they've also written books and counter books on all the different points of philosophy. And ultimately what happened is that nowadays For instance, there was a certain time when Karmakanda was practiced, and then Buddhism came along and overcame Karmakanda, and then other people came along. Shankara came along, and he all the Buddhists left India. They all had to get out because they were defeated. So historically, we have these different systems of philosophy battling it out for on the Indian subcontinent, and so we have basically Vedanta or Uttaramimamsa coming out as the winner. So there are different flavors of Vedanta. If you go to India today, mostly everybody is following some form of Vedanta as their underlying philosophy. They may be performing some, they may be belonging to some theological school of following of worshipping Shiva or worshipping Shakti or worshipping Vishnu or worshipping some other devata, some other form of God that they want to worship. But underlying that, there's some philosophical school, and normally the biggest, by population is probably the Smarta school, following Adi Shankaracharya. And then the Vaishnava, there are different Vaishnava schools after that. So all of these schools, basically today, are following some form or some flavor of Vedanta. And so the persons who follow Vedanta, they follow the interpretation of three most important texts in Vedanta. And those three most important texts are called the Prasthana Trayi or Traya. So the word Traya in Sanskrit means three, and Prasthana means basic text. So the Prasthanas are basic texts. So these basic texts were commented on by different acharyas, and acharya, of course, means teacher or guru. So the different acharyas of the different lineages have commented on these three main texts. And the three main texts are the Vedantas, the Vedas themselves, or the Upanishads, the philosophical part of the Vedas, mainly those first 10 or 13 Upanishads, right? The Vedanta Sutras, which are, the Vedanta Sutras take the subject matter of the Upanishads and put them all in a logical order. Because when you read the Upanishads, there are doctrines all over the place, and different Upanishads talk about different things, but it's not in a particular order. It's not in a logical order. It's not in a step-by-step order that you can understand philosophy. So take the doctrines. For instance, here he's talking about Adhikarana. Adhikarana Suravali is a book by Vedanta Deshika. Adhikarana means a subject, a particular philosophical point. And so the Vedanta Sutras will divide up philosophy into different adhikaranas, different little subsections that speak about a particular doctrine or understanding, discuss a particular doctrine. So that's an adhikarana. So the Prasthana Trayi is the Upanishads, the main Upanishads, the Vedanta Sutra, which explains them in a logical order, and the Bhagavad Gita, which is a very, very basic and main text in Hinduism, like the Hindu Bible, which of course is a section that comes from the Mahabharata. Another thing which the acharyas, all the different acharyas of all the different Vedantic schools have given their commentaries on the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. And another thing which they do is they also there's another part of the Mahabharata, Vishnu Sahasranama, the 1,000 names of Vishnu, which they also give their commentary on, which is very good. So for just for an example, Ramanuja has given commentary. He's given 3 commentaries on the Vedanta Sutra. He's given a summary of commentary on the Upanishads called Vedartha Sangraha. Then he's given 3 commentaries on the Vedanta Sutra. They are Sri Bhashya, his magnum opus, his biggest work. Sri Bhashya, there's one called Vedanta Sara and Vedanta Deepa, right? So Vedanta Deepa is a less voluminous work than Sri Bhashya, and Vedanta Sara is an even shorter version, right? The essence of Vedanta. And those are 3 commentaries that Ramanuja wrote on Vedanta Sutra. He wrote Vedanta Sangraha and the Upanishads, and he wrote also Gita Bhasya, commentary on the Gita. He left the commentary on Vishnu Sahasranama to his disciple Parasara Bhatta, or a grand disciple basically, Parasara Bhatta. And Parasara Bhatta wrote Bhagavad Gunadarpanam, commentary on the Thousand Names of Vishnu, the Vishnu Sahasranama. So there we have, that's for the Vishishtadvaita school, for the Sri Vaishnava school. Those are the main commentaries on the main text, the Prasthana Trayi, which is actually, if we add the Vishnu Sahasranama, we can say it's 4. But the main 3 philosophical texts, and Shankara did the same thing. He wrote on these 3 or 4 texts, and so did Nimbarka, so did Vallabha, so did Baladeva for the Chaitanya school, so has some of these other acharyas. So in order to establish a school of Vedanta today, or since the time of Shankaracharya, which was about the 8th century, right? Since the time of Shankaracharya, basically, in order to establish a school of philosophy which goes with a type of Vedanta, a flavor of Vedanta, you have to have a commentary on these 3 texts. Okay, so here it's discussed. So that was just a little bit because we mentioned the Upanishads and Vedanta Sutras of Badarayana. Badarayana is also sometimes known as Vedavyasa, or the author of the Vedanta Sutras is normally called Badarayana. Some people say Vyasa, like that. The word Vyasa simply means compiler. So he editor or compiler. So there may have been the same Vyasa that compiled the Puranas and compiled the Mahabharata, or compiled the Vedanta Sutras, or it may have been a different person. We're not exactly sure, but that's okay. He's normally considered to be the same person, but to make a distinction, the person who wrote the Vedanta Sutras, who systematized the ideas in the Upanishads, right, is called Badarayana. Okay, so continuing on. This is a unique classic, since in one compendium, in one book, right, Vedanta Deshika gives a brief exposition of the main tenets of all the Indian philosophical systems, including Vedanta, and highlights their merits as well as their defects. Right, so he's not just going to be smashing these other schools, he's going to be saying what is good of these other schools as well. In 2 of his earlier publications, SMS Chari has dealt with Tattva Mukta Kalapa and Adhikarana Sharavali, right? So if you've read any of his other books, he has 2 other books, very, very technical books about Advaita and Vishishtadvaita and the differences, and also about Buddhism and Vishishtadvaita and the differences. And justified the claim of Vedanta Deshika that Vishishtadvaita Darshana, and the word Darshan means to see. So when we have a Vada, or we have a Mata, we have a doctrine, we see that's a way of looking at the world. So Darshana means like a viewpoint, a way of looking at the world. So Vishishtadvaita Darshana simply means the system of understanding of Ramanuja. So he justified the claim, Vedanta Deshika has justified the claim that Vishishtadvaita Darshana is a sound system, both on philosophical and logical grounds. So SNS Chari is saying that he has now taken up the study of Paramattha Bhanga, which he's going to translate in this book, to demonstrate through a critical review of all other schools of thought, including Vedanta schools, how Vishishtadvaita can be regarded as the soundest philosophical system. The original text of Paramattha Bhanga that he's working with is written in Mani Pravala. Now, Mani Pravala, in case we've discussed it before, but Mani means a gem, or specifically it means a pearl, and Pravala means coral. So coral is also a very precious sort of semi-precious sort of gem. And in South India, a lot of people, sometimes we see the ladies, they wear necklaces that are made of alternate pearls and coral, pearl and coral necklace, red and white, white pearl, red coral, like this. It's a very beautiful necklace. So the term Mani Pravala means pearl coral. So pearl coral, what does that mean? It means one of them should be understood to be Sanskrit, one of them should be understood to be Tamil. So Sanskrit Tamil, Sanskrit Tamil. So it's a type of Sanskritized Tamil, or Tamil. It's really Tamilized Sanskrit. You have Sanskrit words with Tamil endings like that. So this was a type of language which the medieval Sri Vaishnava philosophers wrote in, and they wrote in this language in order to make their books accessible to the regular people who just spoke Tamil, but who understood a lot of the Sanskrit terminology, who had many Sanskrit terms that they understood, but yet the common language was Tamil. So they wrote using Sanskrit words, but with Tamil grammatical endings, putting all those Sanskrit words together with Tamil endings and Tamil grammar. So that is called Manipravala. It's a medieval type of language, which is a hybrid between Sanskrit and Tamil, which is used by in many of these works by the Sri Vaishnavacharyas. So it's also sort of difficult because people nowadays don't understand the Sanskrit, or they don't understand the Tamil, and so you have to understand basically both to be able to read Manipravala. So anyway, that's what the book was originally written in. The statements expressing the prima facie views. A prima facie view will be the first view put forward. The normal system of discussing things is that a view will be put forward by somebody, and then the opponent will counteract that view with his arguments, and then the person may have the original person stating the original view. So the prima facie view is the original view. He may have some other objections, and then finally back and forth until there's a siddhanta, until there's a conclusion, and people understand what the reality is. That there was this idea, there was that idea, we discussed it, and we finally came to a conclusion. And the conclusion is that usually the original idea was a mistake. That's usually the way it's done, is that the original idea is given with understanding of how it's considered to be correct, and then we show by different reasoning and also by different quotations from different sources how that original idea is not actually correct. So this is the way certain discussions go on, philosophical discussions go on. So the statements expressing the prima facie views of the exponents of the concerned schools of thought, and also the criticisms against them, are brief and cryptic, but significant with deeper implications in order to make it accessible to the modern scholars interested in the comparative and critical study of Indian philosophy. He has attempted to present this in English, but there's going to be a lot of Sanskrit jargon, which we have to understand. In order to enhance this treatise, I have drawn material from the source books of different darshanas, again, different schools of thought, and also included details of the criticisms furnished in other works of Vedanta Deshika, such as Tattva Mukta Kalapa, Sarvartha Siddhi, Nyaya Siddhanjana, Nyaya Parishuddhi, Sheshvara Mimamsa, and Shatadushini. So these are all other works of Vedanta Deshika. Vedanta Deshika was prolific, and he wrote about 120 works. And many of them were on philosophy like this. So in dealing with the Vedanta schools, Vedanta Deshika mentions in his Paramartha Bhanga only those of Shankara, Bhaskara, Yadava Prakash, and Vyakarna. The later schools of Vedanta, such as Madhva's Dvaita, Beda of Nimbarka, Shuddha Dvaita of Vallabha, Achintya Beda of the Chaitanya school, and of other Shaivite schools of Vedanta, were left out, since most of these developed post-Vedanta Deshika, after Vedanta Deshika. So, after his period. So, however, in order to claim that Vishishtadvaita is a sounder system of Vedanta, it is considered desirable to present also a comparative and critical analysis of the main doctrines of the later schools. So S.M.S. Chari has therefore extended the scope of his treatise, right, to include a consideration of all the schools of Vedanta that we know of today. It is for the first time that such an attempt is made to present in English and in one volume a critique of all schools of thought along with Vishishtadvaita. It is hoped that this book will be invaluable for the comparative study of Indian philosophy in general and fuller understanding of Vishishtadvaita. I should pay he's paying now his respects to his Acharya, the late Sri Gostipuram, Somya Narayanacharya Swami, who imparted to him the knowledge of Vedanta, and also wish to pay his respects to His Holiness Shivan Shadakopa Narayana Yatindra Mahadeshikan, who at that time was the present pontiff of the Ahobilam Mutt, the 45th year, and also His Holiness Sri Abhinava Vagisha Brahma Tantra Parakala Swami of the Brahma Tantra Brahma Parakala Mutt of Mysore, the present pontiff of Parakala Mutt, which is in Mysore, for inspiring me with blessings to undertake this work. And then he also thanks the different scholars who helped him. 3 scholars helped him, N.S. Ramanuja Tadacharya, K.S. Varacharya, and V. Srivad Shankaracharya, who helped him with the critical texts of Paramatabhanga, and also one of those persons, N.S. Ramanuja Tadacharya, who wrote the foreword in Sanskrit. Part 1 is the fundamental doctrines of Vishishtadvaita. So we're going to take up the first thing is the Chit Tattva, or the sentient, the doctrine of the sentient being. After briefly explaining the fundamental metaphysical categories of Vishishtadvaita, Vedanta Deshika takes up for detailed examination the doctrine of Jiva first, following the order in which the 3 tattvas are mentioned in the Svetashvatara Upanishad. So Svetashvatara Upanishad is one of those 13 Upanishads that I told you about were the main Upanishads. So Vedanta Deshika's idea is to take up the doctrine of the Jiva first, and as I said, that's very logical, to take up the doctrine of the Jiva or the Chaitanya or the Chit Tattva first, sentient. Regarding the specific nature of the Jiva, is defined as an entity which is sentient in character, or Chaitanya. Chaitanya means a sentient person having consciousness, which is wholly and always supported, adeya. So supported, adeya, and controlled by a higher being, videha. So this jiva is always supported and controlled by a higher being, videha, which exists for the benefit of the supreme, shesha. So shesha, right? A shesha means like a servant or something that exists for the benefit of the supreme, shesha. Right? Besides, it should be anu, or monadic in nature. The word anu in Sanskrit means it should be tiny. It should be atomic, anu, very small. In other words, the jiva is that sentient being which is dependent for its existence on the supreme being. We're giving some definitions here according to Vishishtadvaita. The sentient being which is dependent upon its existence on the supreme being, which is wholly and always controlled by him, and which exists for the benefit of the Paramatman. The Paramatman is also the supreme being. Parama means supreme, and Atman means this spiritual being. So Atman means the spiritual being. We're talking here about the Jivatman and the Paramatman as being 2 different beings, 2 different entities. And here, and is also anu in nature. So let's just have a look at that again. That is the definition of the jiva. The jiva is that sentient with consciousness being, which is dependent for its existence on the supreme being, which is wholly and always controlled by him, and which exists for the benefit of Paramatman, and it is also anu, or monadic or atomic in nature. Alternatively, jiva is defined as that spiritual entity which is self-manifest as I, aham pratyaya, aham, the word aham means I in Sanskrit, so I, and which is qualified by the characteristics of adiyatva, vidyatva, sheshatva, and anutva. Okay, so when we see in Sanskrit, we would see the word tva at the end. We see the letters tva, TVA, at the end of a thing. It means ness in English. So anutva means atomicness. Sheshatva means servitorship, being a servant, the nature of being a servant, the nature of being atomic, anutva, the nature of being a servant, the nature of being controlled, videyatva, by the Supreme Being, right? Adeyatva, the nature of being supported, adeya, being supported by the Supreme. So those four things are characteristic of the jiva or the chit tattva, the sentient being, the individual sentient being is supported, controlled, is a servant to, and is atomic. Is a servant to the Supreme and is atomic, right? These are these four characteristics. Each of these terms defining the nature of jiva is full of metaphysical significance. The term chaitana means, chaitana again, what sentient in character, means sentient in character. The term chaitana means that which possesses knowledge as a dharma or attribute. Dharma or attribute. Has knowledge as an attribute. I think, therefore I am, is what Descartes said. I think I'm sentient, therefore I know that I exist. So the attribute of the chaitana, of the attribute of the living being, of the sentient being, of the living being is consciousness, is sentience, is knowledge. Right? Is knowledge. Okay, so that is one of the main attributes of a conscious being is it can have knowledge. It has some knowledge, right? It is therefore a sentient being or spiritual entity, unlike a non-sentient material energy which has no knowledge. Obviously, material matter has no consciousness and therefore can have no knowledge. The other terms, that is, adiyatva, vidyatva, and sheshatva, would substantiate that the jiva is the sharira or body of Ishvara in a metaphysical sense, and organic and inherent relationship between the jiva and Ishvara similar to the physical body of the jiva. Okay, so the other terms, adiyatva, right, being supportedness, vidyatma being controlled, sheshatva being a servant of, right, substantiate that the jiva or the individual soul, right, the individual consciousness, is the sharira or body of Ishvara, of God, in a metaphysical sense. Okay, so what does that mean? So God controls, he's the master, and he also, he controls and he supports and controls, right? And the jiva is the servant of, right? So if God is the soul, if this is the sharira shariri bhava idea coming from Ramanuja, the idea to understand the relationship between the individual soul and God. So just like the body is controlled by the soul, the body is supported by the soul, right? If the soul leaves, the body no longer has any support and therefore it decays, right? So the body is also does the bidding of the soul. The soul wants to do something, right? The individual wants to do something, the body does it for him, right? So because of these three aspects, right, we can say that the relationship between God and the sentient beings is like the relationship between the soul and the body, our soul and body. So where the jiva is considered to be like the body, and the Lord is considered to be like the soul. Right. So in a metaphysical sense. An organic inherent relationship between the jiva and Ishvara, similar to the physical body of the jiva, right? So this is an organic and inherent relationship, right, between the Lord and between Paramatman and the Atman. Okay, so an objection may be raised against this theory. Okay, so this is the idea, the understanding of Vishishtadvaita, right, of the relationship between the soul and the Supreme Soul. So an objection may come, right? So we may have an objection to that. In our ordinary experience, we only know that the jiva is a supporter of the physical body. The soul is a supporter of the physical body. But we do not comprehend that the soul, or the jiva, is also the body of Ishvara, right? We have no comprehension of that. In other words, this theory is there, and that we're it's an analogy. We're analogizing that the body that the jiva is like the body of God. Okay, so that's an objection. So is it then appropriate to regard, in ordinary experience, we don't have that ordinary experience. We only know that the jiva is supporter of the physical body. We do not comprehend that the jiva is also the body of Ishvara. Is it then appropriate to regard the jiva as the body of Ishvara when we don't have that consciousness of that happening, right? Which in fact is not comprehensible to us. Right? So why should we believe something which we can't comprehend? For whatever reason, we're not comprehending that. We're not understanding that. We don't have a direct perception of that. So though the prima facie, the initial view, though prima facie, the objection is relevant, it is to be admitted, contends Vedanta Deshika, on the basis of scriptural texts, that the jiva is the sharira, or the body of Ishvara, right? So we've given the initial view of Vedanta Deshika, the initial view of Vishishtadvaita, is that the jiva can be considered to be the body of Ishvara, or God. The objection comes as we don't have any direct experience of that, right? Like we have the experience of the jiva and of the living being and the physical body. The relationship, we have that as a direct experience because each one of us has a physical body. So we have the direct experience of thinking something, of the soul wanting to do something, and the body doing it. We have that relationship. We understand that relationship because we are in this body, but we don't understand the relationship between the soul and God. So that's the objection. And Vedanta Deshika says we should accept this. We should accept this idea of the jiva being like the soul of God, because there are scriptural texts that say so. And what are those scriptural texts? The Antaryami Brahmana, which is a part of the Vedas, clearly states that the jiva is the sharira of Paramatma. The jiva, or the individual entity, is the body of God, right? Clearly states that the jiva is the sharira of Paramatma, who by virtue of his immanence is its inner controller. His immanence. So his immanence means, because God is, okay, so first of all, we have to understand a little bit about Ishvara, or the Supreme. Ishvara is all pervasive. So he is immanent everywhere. He's not only transcendental, he's not only beyond this material world and the material souls. He's not above us. He's not also above, but he's also within us. He's also pervading everything in the universe, including matter and even the soul. So because of this, we understand. Yantayami Brahmana clearly states that the jiva is the sharira of Paramatman by virtue of his immanence. So by virtue of his immanence, just like the soul is immanent within the physical body, similarly, God is also immanent within the soul and within everything. So again, the Antaryami Brahmana clearly states that the jiva is the sharira of Paramatman by virtue of his immanence as its inner controller. It is the inner controller. And the reference here is to the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad 5.7.22, which is the Madhyandina version. There's different schools of the Shukla Yajurveda, and it mentions the Sanskrit for that quotation that shows that the Antiyami Brahmana says that the jiva is the sharira, or the body of the Paramatman, or God, and so he's quoting that there. It may also be questioned whether it's appropriate to regard videyatva again, meaning the controlling nature of God, right, or being subjected to the control of Ishvara as a nature of the Jivatman, because it is found that the jiva is capable of functioning on its own in all activities, both religious and non-religious, and in view of it, it is free to do what it likes and not obligated to obey the commands of a higher being. So this is another objection. Another objection is that you say that the jiva, that the soul, is completely controlled by God, but we think that the soul has free will. The soul has free will and can do whatever it likes. Okay, so that's the next objection. To this, Vedanta Deshika explains that Ishvara, or God, has endowed the jiva with knowledge and a capacity, and also proper guidance to act in the right direction with the aid of sacred texts. So the Supreme Person has given us the scriptures. In the scriptures, it tells us how we should act. And he's also given us knowledge, and also given us the mental capacity to understand the sacred texts and to follow that guidance. Therefore, it's not inappropriate to attribute the characteristic of videyatva to the jiva. So the characteristic of being a controller can be there, right? In the jiva. For one who is dependent upon the body, mind, sense organs, past karma, and other factors for engaging himself in activities, the need to follow the dictates of shastrans or sacred texts is in performing the prescribed deeds and avoidance of what is prohibited. Videyatva is fully justified. Right? So let's say that again. For one who is dependent on the body, mind, sense organs, past karma, and other factors, which we can look there are different factors in any action. In the Gita, Krishna says there's five factors in action, and many of these factors are given here. Many parts of them are. The body, mind, sense organs, past karmas, other factors for engaging himself in activities, and need to follow the dictates of Shastra and Shastric texts in performing the prescribed deeds, and avoidance of what is prohibited, the atva, is fully justified. So one is dependent upon many things. That when the jiva, as a sentient being, should be able to act on its own according to its desires, would it be appropriate to regard it as parashesha bhuta, right? That is, dependent on all matters, on the higher being, right? So that's another objection. So the other objection is, can we really say, so what we're really talking about here is free will and determinism, right? So free will and determinism. Is the jiva actually able to act independently, or is it dependent in all matters upon God, upon the higher being, right? Which he says here is parashesha bhuta, right? Para means the supreme, shesha means the servant, and bhuta means anyway, parashesha bhuta means dependent in all matters on the supreme being. So the question here is, Therefore, can we think that the jiva is dependent upon all things, all matters on the supreme being? The objection is ruled out on the grounds that a person, such as a servant, though he serves his master for selfish purposes, such as wages, he is still considered subordinate, right? So even if you have a servant who by will is serving you because he's doing that to get a salary, still he's a servant. So we still say that the jiva is a servant, even if the jiva is doing things to try to get his own aims fulfilled. Insofar as he gives pleasure to his master in serving him loyally. In view of this, Ramanuja defines sheshatva, or servitorship, right, as the desire on the part of the subordinate to cause delight to the one who is the higher being. Right. So the servant always wants to please the master. Right. In view, so thus it is stated, paragata atishaya adana ichaya upadeyatvam eva yasya swarupam. Right. And this is a quote from Vedanta Sangraha of Ramanuja. Such a character constitutes the swarupa, or the swarupa meaning the nature, the true nature, the true nature of the jiva, of the individual soul. That is, the jiva by its very nature is always subordinate or dependent on the Lord. Right? So when the sole motive of the servant is to please his master, the minor selfish purposes for which he may work do not affect his servitorship, right? So still, the main purpose of the servant is to serve the master and to please the master. Even though he might be doing it for money, a servant might be getting a salary, even though he might be getting some other of his own aims achieved by getting the salary, right? Still, so he might have some minor selfish purposes, but still, he may work for which he may work do not affect his sheshatva, do not affect the fact that he's still a servant. The attribution of sheshatva or servitorship to the jiva is also justified on the basis of the principle laid down in Mimamsa. So there are many principles of disputation and argumentation given in Mimamsa, or the Kamakanda section, right? According to which a person who performs a yaga or a sacrifice purely for selfish purposes, such as attaining Swarga or the heavenly planets, is rewarded, is regarded as Shesha of the karma. He is the servant of the karma itself. So here he's quoting from Mimamsa. In Mimamsa, it's understood that a person may perform a sacrifice in order to go to heaven. And that person is considered to be the servant of that particular sacrifice, the servant of that particular action, according to principles of Mimamsa. So we don't really know because we haven't studied principles of Mimamsa deeply, but I'm willing to give Vedanta Deshika that he's obviously he knows, and he's quoting that. A more serious objection, right? So these are all objections to the idea that of shariri bhava, that the soul is like the body of God. Right? The souls in the universe are like the body of God. This sharira bhava of Ramanuja. And these are all Vedanta Deshikas dealing with different objections to that idea. A more serious objection is raised against the concept of shariratva, or being like a body, the idea of the relationship being like that of the soul and the body, employed in respect to the jiva as sharira of Ishvara. So he's going to give an objection about this idea. When Jivatman is not a mere conglomeration of various physical and mental organs, but also the sharira or owner of the physical body, right? How can the jiva be regarded as the sharira of Ishvara? And Ishvara considered to be the soul. How can God be considered to be the soul of the universe and the conglomerate of souls, when the soul is not like the body? The soul is also not like the physical body, because the physical body is made up of all these different organs and pieces, and right, the soul is not made up of all different pieces and things. So how can you say the soul is the body of God? Right? It's not made up of all these different pieces like we see the physical body. So how can you therefore say there's a good objection? Okay. So this is justified if we properly understand the true meaning of the term sharira. So we have to understand what the word sharira actually means. So there are two terms here: sharira, which means body, and sharirin, which means the soul, the person who owns the body, the person who controls the body, the person, the person who pervades the body with consciousness, right? As Ramanuja explains, the word sharira is not to be taken in the ordinary sense as a physical body, right? The definition of sharira is offered by the Nyayikas. So we have to look at the Nyaya school, of philosophy, and the Nyayas will give a definition of sharira. The definition offered by the Nyayikas for sharira is found to be logically defective, right? So other schools, they may give a wrong definition of what the word sharira actually means, since such a description is not applicable to the physical elements and other entities which are described in the Antaryami Brahmana as the sharira of Paramatman. So when we look at the Antaryami Brahmana, which we did, which is our proof from the Vedas, from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, that the soul is the body of God. So if anybody questions you, anybody says to you, okay, so what does Ramanuja believe? Ramanuja believes that the soul and the universe are the body of God. Okay, so where did you get that from? It comes from Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, the Antaryami Brahmana. Therefore, we go and we look there, and therefore you get the Sanskrit, right, for it, and the Sanskrit will include the word sharira. And then somebody will come back to you and make an objection. No, the word sharira just simply means body. It doesn't mean anything else but body, right? There's no other meaning for that. But what he's saying here is that we have to understand a different meaning of the word sharira. We have to understand in the terms of body, but we also understand it in otherwise. A correct definition of sharira he's going to give now, which is applicable to all entities, both sentient and non-sentient, right, is offered by Ramanuja. So both sentient and non-sentient, the non-sentient matter of the world and the sentient souls of the world, they're all considered to be the sharira, or the body of God, right? So thus it is defined as yasya chetanasya yadravyam sarvatmana svarte yantum daryitum cha shakyam tat shesha taika swarupam tat tasya shariram. Okay, so that's the definition given by Ramanuja of sharira or shariram. So this is what it means in English. That is, in respect of a sentient being, either Paramatman or Jivatman, either God or the Jiva or the individual soul, whatever entity wholly and always controlled, sustained, and that which exists for the purpose of its controller, that entity is to be regarded as the sharira, or body, in the technical sense. And he'll explain this further in different chapters, okay? But there you have the definition of sharira, okay? So that entity is to be regarded as sharira in a technical sense, right? Whether it's Paramatma or Jivatman, whatever entity wholly and always controlled, right? That wholly and controlled, sustained, and that exists for the purpose of its controller. There's your definition of is matter, all the matter of the universe, always wholly controlled and sustained and exists for the purpose of God? Yes. Are all the souls, either individually or collectively, right, always wholly and always controlled and sustained and exist for only the purpose of God? Yes. Therefore, because they fit that definition, the souls, the individual souls, and the universe of matter fit that definition, therefore we can call them sharira. Okay? That's the point. So the two entities should be inseparably related as long as they endure. Right? So that's also another part of it. The two entities, the controller and the controlled, right? God and the jiva, right? Are inseparably related. So somehow or other, God and the souls are inseparably related. The physical body and the soul within the body are also inseparably related as long as they endure. The body doesn't endure. The soul, of course, always endures. The soul is eternal. The physical, so the physical body is inseparably related to the jiva. The body is sustained and controlled by the jiva, right? The body is, your body, physical body is sustained and controlled by the soul within it. Yeah. The body also exists for the purpose of the jiva. The jiva uses the body for its own purposes, right? Thus, the jiva, or the individual soul, is the shariri, or the sharirin, the owner of the physical body, which is the sharira. So we have two terms here: the sharira, the shariri, or the sharirin, right? And the sharira. God is the shariri, or the sharirin. He is the owner and controller and supporter and uses for his own purposes of the material, of everything else, the material world and the souls. And the material world and the souls are God's sharira, God's body, according to the Antaryami Brahmana, which is our Vedic source for this information. On the basis of the same logic, the relationship between Paramatma and Jivatma, and so also other entities in the universe. What other entities are there? Material nature, matter, right? Are regarded as the sharira, or the body of Paramatman. Correct. In view of this explanation, it is but appropriate to regard the jiva as the sharira of Paramatman. Good. Now we're going to go to another point. Okay, so that point is completely understood. There were a few objections. First of all, it was laid out the proposition of sharira shariri bhava, right? It was explained. It was explained exactly the 4 points that define the soul, right? Vidyatva, adhyatva, sheshatva, and anutva, right? We have yet to talk about anutva, but we're going to talk about it next. Okay, so then he explained that there were some objections to this idea of sharira shariri bhava, and he overcame all the objections by explaining how the word sharira, what it actually means, what the real definition of the word sharira is. So when people say to you, okay, what does Ramanuja believe? Well, first of all, Ramanuja believes that his philosophy is that the world and the souls are the body of God. How is that? That is stated in the Antaryami Brahmana. Well, what does that mean exactly? What does that mean? It means that, here's the definition: whatever entity is wholly and always controlled, sustained, and that which exists for the purpose of its controller, that entity is regarded as the body of the controller of the other entity. Okay? Right. So continuing on here, the admission of anutva. Anutva means atomicness, the atomic nature. The atomic nature of the jiva is also questioned by the Nyayayikas, by the people in the Nyaya school, who regard the jiva as vibhu, or all pervasive. Right? So in Nyaya, in the school, there's different schools of Nyaya, but he's saying in this Nyaya school, they consider the jiva, the individual soul, to be all pervasive and not to be atomic, not to be monadic. There are a few arguments that support this theory. First, wherever the body moves, it is found to experience both pain and pleasure. In order to account for it, the admission of movement of the jivatma to all places would amount to unnecessary additional explanation. If some fortune arises in distant places, different places, far away from the jiva cannot experience it unless it is present there. Besides, yogis, muktas, nitya jivas, right? Yogis meaning, muktas, people who are liberated, nitya jivas, living in the transcendental world, right? So nitya suris, people who are eternally liberated, people who have become liberated, or otherwise yogis, people who are transcendentalists in this world, right? In the transcendental world, are capable of assuming at the same time several bodies. Okay. The Gita also describes the jiva as eternal and also as omnipresent. Nitya sarvagataha stanuhu. Taking all these facts into consideration, it would be more appropriate to admit vibhutva for the jiva, as in the case of Paramatman. So expansiveness, right? So the scriptural statement stating that jiva is anu is to be interpreted in a different way according to the critics. Right. Okay, so what are we saying here? Vedanta Deshika is saying that the jiva is monadic, the jiva is atomic. But there are other people, the Nyayikas, the followers of Nyaya school, and maybe some other schools, they say, no, the jiva is not monadic, it's not atomic, right? And they make these points. They say that the jiva moves to different places and normally suffers and enjoys different activities that go on in those different places. But we've also heard that there are yogis, there are also liberated persons, right, who are in the transcendental world, who are able to assume several bodies in different places at the same time. The Gita also describes the jiva as eternal and also as omnipresent in words like nityaha sarvagataha stanuhu, right? So these people, these critics of Vedanta Deshika's idea or Ramanuja's idea that the soul is monadic, they give these ideas that the soul is more than monadic. It can be in two places at once, or it can be expanded like that. Taking all these facts into consideration, right? They say, the critics say, that we have to admit that the jiva is not monadic. It's not just in one place, and it's not just tiny, atomic, or monadic. But Vedanta Deshika says about that, he says, those people's arguments are untenable. Those people's arguments are wrong. It is warranted from our experience that whenever the body experiences pleasure and pain, it experiences them associated with the jivatman, which also moves along with the body, right? Okay, so this is his first point. Vedanta Deshika says that, okay, let's take your points one by one, your criticisms. The body experiences pleasure and pain, right? But it's not the body. It's only in association with the jivatman. When there's no soul in the body doesn't experience those things. The soul is the one that experiences the pleasure and pain that's coming through the senses to the body. It is superfluous to postulate for this purpose the vibhutva of the greatness of the expansiveness of the individual soul, which is not warranted by scripture. Fortunes and misfortunes can arise at distant places out of the will of God, or it is not necessary that the individual soul, the jiva, should be present there. In the case of the yogis, right, the same one, the jiva residing in the heart of the body, can activate out of his yogic power all other bodies created by him, right? So just because yogis may appear to multiply and do things in different places, it doesn't mean that there isn't one soul which is activating all those bodies. In the case of the yogis, the same jiva residing in the heart of the body can activate out of his yogic power all the bodies created by him. The Upanishads speak of the exit of the jiva from the body, utkranti, exit of the jiva from the body, and its movement to the higher realms do not allow for the admission of vibhutva. Vibhutva, since vibhutva cannot have movement. Okay, so the idea of vibhutva would be that the soul is not monadic, it's not atomic, but it's all pervasive. If something is all pervasive, it can't move because it's everywhere already. It cannot move. So that's what Vedanta Deshika is saying. So this is these are arguments against vibhutva, or all pervasiveness of the individual soul. Hence, when we look in the Gita, that quote from the Gita, sarvargata, right? Sarva means going everywhere, or going everywhereness, right? The ability to be everywhere at the same time for the jivatma is to be interpreted appropriately. Okay, so we have that statement in the Gita, and therefore we have to understand that statement in a different way, in the sense that it is capable of entering into all bodies, right? Not that it is in everywhere, but it's capable of going specifically into all bodies. Not that it inhabits all bodies at the same time, right? So what he's saying is it means, this statement in the Gita means anupravesham. Pravesham means to enter in. The anu, or the monadic soul, can enter into a body, right? Not that it is in every body, not that it's all pervasive. The Upanishads categorically state that the jiva is anu. Okay, so once again, Vedanta Deshika is going to slam a lid on this idea, right? That the jiva is everywhere, is all pervasive. The individual soul is all pervasive, right? He says from the Upanishads, and he quotes from Mundaka Upanishad 3:19, Esho anuratma chetasa vetitavya. Right, so that's his quote. So when we meet people who, maybe we meet somebody who's an Advaiti like that, they say, no, the individual consciousness is all pervasive. In moksha, once we get rid of Maya, then we'll see that everything is that we are all pervasive. that the individual is also all pervasive. No, that's not true. And then based on Mundaka Upanishad 319, we can say, no, that's not correct. It is Anu. Right? It says here very, very clearly, Esho, that Anuratma, Anu. It is Anu. It is monadic. It is atomic. Okay. So, the Jainas, right? People who are Jains believe that the Jivatma, right? They don't believe it's completely all pervasive, but they also don't believe that it's small. They believe somewhere in between. So they say here the Jainas believe that the Jivatma is of the dimension of the physical body of the Jiva. Okay, so for instance, an elephant has a big Jiva. The Jiva is the same size as the consciousness that pervades the body. So however big the body is, that's how big the Jiva is according to the Jains, right? That's their idea. So this is a new idea. We're coming to a new part here. The argument in support of this theory is the judgment that, for instance, I am fat, right? And the experience of pain in the leg or pleasure arising in the head, right? Prove the fact that the Jiva is pervasive of all parts of the body. Yes? So this is what the Jains say. The Jains say, okay, because you can feel your head, you feel pain in your head or pleasure in your different parts of your body, you feel different sensations. Because of that, we have to say that the Jiva itself, the soul itself, is the size of the body. So if you have a big body, you have a bigger soul. If you have a little body, you have a little smaller soul. If you're an elephant, you have an elephant-sized soul, whatever it is. Like that. So that's the Jain's idea. It's a very simplistic idea of the soul, that the soul is basically the size of the body. Okay? But Vedanta Deshika says this is untenable. This is wrong. The judgment, I am fat, is a case of delusion. It's an illusion. It's wrong. The experience of pain in the leg by the Jiva can be easily explained on the basis of the fact that the attributive knowledge of the Jiva, right? There's a thing called Dharma Adbhuta Jnana. Attributive knowledge of the Jiva, which pervades all body, experiences the pain and not the Jiva directly. Okay? So it isn't that the Jiva or the soul directly. What is the soul? Consciousness. The soul is consciousness and knowledge. It doesn't directly experience the pain in the leg, or it doesn't directly perceive that I am fat, right? It indirectly perceives these things, right? It doesn't directly perceive these things. If this explanation is not admitted, right, it would amount to the admission of the Jiva breaking up into several parts in respect of yogis who can assume different bodies, right? So if a yogi has one Jiva and then he creates other bodies and everything like that, he has these other bodies that he's controlling, then that would mean that the soul is breaking up, right? Even if we cut off a leg or something like that, it would mean that we're cutting off a part of the soul. If the soul is that big and we cut off, the soul would be shrinking and growing as we grow. This is a very strange idea, right? The description of Jiva as Ananta or infinite in the state of liberation or mukti is to be understood in the sense of attributive knowledge, right, of the Jiva, the Dharma Bhuta Jnana. Dharma Bhuta Jnana, right? So the knowledge, the attributive knowledge, the knowledge of the Jiva is infinite in liberation, like that. Becomes infinite in its range since it becomes totally free of karma, which had eclipsed the jnana or the knowledge in the state of bondage. Okay, so once again to sum up, the body, the jiva is not the size of the body. The jiva is not all expansive. What can be all expansive is the knowledge of the jiva, is the dharma adbhuta jnana, the attributive knowledge of the jiva can be all expansive. When it's freed from karma, freed from illusions, right, in the state of moksha or mukti, right? So otherwise, it would conflict with the Shrutis declaring that the jiva is nirvikara. Nirvikara. So nirvikara means unchanged, unchangeable, or uniform. The pervasion of the jiva throughout the body is to be taken in the sense that it pervades through its jnana, through its knowledge. What is this called? It's called dharma bhuta jnana, which is its essential attribute, right? The essential attribute of the soul is knowledge or consciousness, right? And therefore, that attribute, by that attribute of the soul, he pervades the whole body. Right? The pervasion of the jiva throughout the body is to be taken in the sense that it pervades through its jnana, which is its essential attribute, and not by its swarupa, not by its form. The form of the soul is anu, or atomic, or monadic. It is not all pervasive, neither is it even pervading the whole body. The swarupa of the jiva doesn't pervade the whole body, but the jnana of the jiva can pervade the whole body. Since it is monadic in nature, yes, the swarupa is monadic in nature, or atomic, as warranted by the Shruti.